at ACU at the moment. We're very lucky to have him. I often call upon him to ring some of our students and do some interviews, so you can get some tips on how to best respond to his questions today. Damien has 16 years experience as a journalist at Australia's largest media company. He's also, following this, he made the leap into media relations, where he has provided communication support for professional teams for a wide variety of sports and industries, as well as also being a sports panelist with the ABC and responsible for the coverage of every news item at the netball in the 2018 Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. So please join me in welcoming both Damien and Milly. What I'm going to do is because we've got a small group today with a lot of students being out on placement at the moment, I might get you all to pop on your videos if your Wi-Fi is capable of you doing that. And we're going to just go around the group. If you could let me know your name, what campus you're normally based at, and what you hope, what your sport or performing art is, and what you hope to get out of today's session. So we might start with Celine, because you're the first on my screen.
Hi everyone. I'm Celine. I'm at Melbourne campus and I play para badminton, which is just a new sport added to the Paralympic Games. And hoping to get a bit more information about media communication stuff out of this session.
Chloe?
Hi, I'm Chloe. I am at the Melbourne campus and I participate and perform in Irish dancing.
And what do you hope to get out of today's session?
Just some information also from the other perspective. I'm interested to see from a journalist perspective on media, as not just our own.
Thank you. Abigail?
So I'm Abigail and I think I'm from the North Sydney campus. I play women's cricket. And from today, I hope to get information based on media skills and how we can use that to like social media and stuff like that.
Thanks. Maria, would you like to give us some info?
Hi everybody. I'm also at the Melbourne campus and I work for the Institute of Child Protection Studies, where our focus is on research and practice guidance on helping practitioners who work with children to keep them safe from things like child sexual abuse, from maltreatment, from any kind of harm. And while our area is not as broad as like sport in general, we do work with the sporting community in helping them think about how to introduce child safe measures in their area, and so how to link that with media and telling that story from a media perspective. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about media in general, and then I can possibly target that to our more specific topic area.
Thanks, Maria. Shihana?
That was really cool, Maria, to hear that. I'm Shahana, North Sydney campus. I play squash. And yeah, I'm just not all that comfortable with social media and self-promotion on social media kind of thing. So I'd like to learn a thing or two from today.
Cool. Eloise.
Sorry, is it working? Yeah.
Yep, you're on.
I'm Eloise. I am a dressage rider in equestrian. And I'm from the Brisbane campus. And for today, a bit like what was just said with self-promotion, I struggle with writing about myself, I guess, on a social media page. So I think it'd be very interesting to learn about that today.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, look, that's enough from me. I'll head over to Damien and we'll get started. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone. I will also just mention, I should have mentioned earlier, we're going to record today's session because so many people couldn't log in because of pracs and stuff. So hopefully that's okay with everyone. Let us know if it's not.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Very good. Now, just before I get started, for those of you, I noticed there was a handful of you interested in finding out a little bit more about social media and, you know, how to make that work a little bit better for you. We do have a social media team here at ACU that works in with the, that's part of my team, the broader team of marketing. So if you have any particular questions or if you've got any particular interests or requests, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with Ben Marshall. You know, I've worked in social media a little bit, and that's part of my role. But there are experts in social media here at ACU that I'm more than happy to put you in touch with. And if there's any specific requests, I'm more than happy to pass those on and get Ben Marshall, who's our social media coordinator here. So if any of those come out, if any specific requests come out of that, Jamie and Claire, Ben is an amazing resource, and he's all over social. But I'll do my best to steer you in that topic area anyway. I'm not going to go into great lengths about myself. I think Jamie, you've sort of spelled out where I'm coming from, but my role as a communications advisor here at ACU is to, I suppose, help facilitate a greater profile, not only of the university itself, but the people and its programs, and that includes, you know, students, that includes lecturers and researchers. So it's in my best interest to make sure everyone here is able to get what they need out of their media goals and media strategies. So the better you guys do, the better I look. So that's what I'm all about. So yeah, I did work for 16 years for News Corp Australia. So that includes, you know, the Courier Mail here in Brisbane and Herald Sun and Daily Telegraph in New South Wales. It might be clear to you, it might not be clear, that I'm not an athlete, I'm not a performer, and I'm barely even elite. But I do have a passion for sport, and I do have a lot of experience in media. So I'm happy to do what I can to help you out today. So what I want to touch on today is a few things. So what we're going to be running through is the media landscape, specifically here in Australia at the moment, which is a pretty rapidly shifting beast at the moment. I'll also touch on why it's important, or why it can be important, to deal with the media and have a strong productive relationship with the media. I'll go into a few tips around social, but also doing face-to-face interviews. And then we'll get through all that and have a little bit of fun, hopefully, with Milly Tapper towards the end, just to give you a bit of an example of what an interview with a journalist might look like, and a couple of little strategies to play with along the way. Okay, so all right, so just want to talk to you about, if I can just go through my notes here. The media landscape at the moment is a really, really interesting one in Australia and around the world. It's highly competitive. It's shifting by the moment. I don't know if any of you would have caught in recent times, there's been a lot of job losses in media across all sorts of different mediums. I know about 15 of my former colleagues at the Courier Mail were made redundant in the last couple of weeks. So it's in terms of the resources available to journalists and media companies at the moment, things are really, really tight and super, super competitive. We talk a lot in the media about traditional media and news media. So, traditional media and new media. And by that, I mean traditional media is, you know, newspapers, radio, TV news, and new media on that side of the coin is a lot of the online stuff, a lot of social media, podcasts, those types of things that have really started to grow in the last couple of years. But it's interesting to note that, so traditional news, which is your newspapers and radio and TV, still occupy about 51% of the market. So about 51% of people who consume their news, they still do via some of those traditional forms of media. So even taking into account how much things are changing at the moment, there's still a lot of that information and news is run through the traditional forms. Tight deadlines. So any journalist you deal with is going to be under the pump in terms of their time as a resource. So when I started out in journalism, which was, sort of 16 or so years ago, we were dealing with perhaps 1 or 2 deadlines per day, which is not a huge amount. But these days, anyone who's dealing with social media and online forms of media, they're on hourly deadlines, those people. So they're really under the pump in terms of their time. The sort of things journalists are looking for are personal stories. So people like reading about people. So the stories that get a lot of reaction on news websites and in terms of engagement with news, the ones that get the most interest are the ones that are about people. We can write stories about announcements. We can write stories about budgets and funding and that type of breaking news. But unless you can personalise it in some way, it doesn't get a whole lot of traction in terms of readership and potential audience. And the other thing that's really important to note here is that where once upon a time news and editorial decisions were made by the journalists themselves and their editors, a lot of those decisions in terms of what makes it into the news are based on analytics. So if you consume, if you're a reader of news websites, you may or may not notice that it's all about clicks and it's all about subscriptions and page views. So anytime a journalist sets out to write a story, in the back of their mind, they're already assessing, is this going to generate clicks? Is it going to be clickbait? Is it going to generate subscriptions to paid media? So that's what they're basing their editorial decisions on, rather than their own experience or their own gut instinct about the news value. It's all based on subscription and clicks, and that's basically the bottom line. Sad but true. A lot of really interesting stories and valuable stories often don't quite make it, just because that they don't tick that sensational box that they need to generate clickbait. And the next part of this is, so why bother with the media? So based on everything I told you, that they're under time pressure and they're really very interested in clicks and subscriptions. Why is it that you guys should look towards maximising your potential to work with the media and develop strong relationships with journalists? A very good reason why. It's an opportunity to raise the profile of your sport, of your industry, of the club you're involved in, and also yourself. And if you do have sponsors, it's a great opportunity to raise the profile of all those things. It's also an opportunity to discuss and to clarify important issues that can often be misunderstood or misrepresented. So you'll know yourselves, if you follow the media and you follow consume news, that things can get misreported and misrepresented. Well, if you have an invitation to talk with a journalist, that's your chance to tell your story. And that's important, because when an audience understands where it is you're coming from, that's when they become engaged, not only with you, but also with your sport and your industry and your area of expertise. Now, can I just check before we move on to the next bit? Has anyone got any experience with media before? Has anyone been interviewed, or Maria, have you had a little bit of experience with that?
I haven't been interviewed, but my role is communications officer. So what I have done is set up interviews with journalists, helped write media releases. We're in the very fortunate position with the Institute that we actually have our own dedicated media liaison officer, Elizabeth Tarika, and she writes our media stories, and and our role is to give her maybe an article that we want to promote that maybe, as you say, throws some light on a key issue or clears up a misunderstanding that we've already written. And then Elizabeth will write maybe a media release, or she'll pitch a story to a particular outlet, and then liaises with us. It gets picked up. If we're lucky, it does get picked up, and then our promotion of who it gets picked up by continues, and we kind of feed that through our own social media program as well.
Cool. Well, it's good to hear. I work with Elizabeth. She's part of my team.
Yeah.
So, she's a superstar.
Yes, yeah. Really gets her head around our issues, and she works also across health sciences, so it's just great that she understands our work.
Terrific. Anyone else have any experiences, good, bad or otherwise, with media and journalists? Eloise, how'd you go?
Yeah, I've been interviewed a couple times, and they just really want to touch on sort of your background story. I think they really like to make it sort of relatable, or just so people can connect a bit more to the person rather than maybe what they've done. They're just asking about, where I'm from, and how I've got to that point. And yeah, it's usually more based on that. And then sort of at the end, they sort of talk about maybe what you would have won or what you've done. Yeah.
How'd you go? Was that uncomfortable?
I got a little bit nervous, but it was okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally normal. I don't think anyone really gets, 100% comfortable with that unless, of course, you're doing it day in.
Yeah.
But yeah, the point you touched on is a good one, that with sport and in any part of society, really, whether it's politics, courts, entertainment news, there's a lot of things that people can just access by searching on Google, just by Googling your name or Googling your results or Googling, all those sort of things, a lot of that stuff is easily accessible. But what people don't have access to is the story behind the story, is, what really makes you tick. And everyone's got a story to tell. I think you'd be surprised. Some people think, I don't really have much of a interesting story to tell, but everyone's got something. And, your motivation for doing what it is you do and what makes you excel I find that fascinating. And, that's why I got into my career, is to find those things out. And you find a lot of general consumers of news are going to want to know, what motivates you, and what drives you to excel and, do the outstanding things that you do. So, it's a funny old game, but but that's what it's all about. People just love reading and hearing about people, basically. Cool. Oh, well, hopefully there's no horror stories in there.
I was going to say, Damien, how, I guess, for some of the guys, it could be hard to sort of hit the nail on the head, where it's like, oh, you might not think your story is interesting, but the public will. How much should you open up and know sort of, where do you cross that line into, I guess, going too far into your personal history, or is there a too far, or how much should they share?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's about, you'll know that yourself as an individual. Like, you'll know how much you're prepared to share in an open forum. That comes down very much to an individual decision. Where what I find is, and I will touch on this a little bit later on, but in media I talk about the grandmother rule, or the grandparent rule. So whenever you find yourself in a situation where you have the opportunity to share something or to comment on something, whether it's social media, whether it's on your own website or a blog or in a media interview, I usually apply the grandmother rule, which is, I wouldn't share anything I wouldn't want my grandparents to read. So that's usually a pretty good question. Like, if you find yourself sitting there thinking, oh, do I share that? Do I not? Am I letting them, am I letting too much of myself be, shared in a public forum? Just ask yourself the question. If I wouldn't want my grandparents or my parents reading about it, then maybe I'll just keep that under my hat for now. That's usually the abiding question. And that works with any kind of media, whether it's social media, interviews, anything. Which is probably not a bad segue into the next bit of the session, is that there's a couple of key points to remember, regardless of what kind of media it is you're dabbling in. While you're competing or while you're performing, dancing, whatever, you are representing not only yourself and your activity or your club, but you're representing ACU as well. So anything you say, do, or even appear to do reflects on your reputation and the university's reputation. So that's probably something that's worth remembering. And further to that, there's so this is probably a bit of a lead into the social media thing. So anything that you appear to say or you actually say or do reflects on your reputation, and that stuff can stay with you for a long, long time, potentially even for life. So, for example, nothing's private. So even Snapchat messages, I don't dabble in Snapchat, but some of you might play around with it. Snapchat messages can be screenshotted and shared. So something that you think is just a bit of a fleeting reference or a fleeting image or a fleeting comment, that stuff can be screenshotted by anyone and it can be shared. I touched on the grandmother rule before, and that definitely applies to social media. So it's always worth, before you tweet or share any kind of, Instagram or Snapchat message, always apply the grandma rule. Do I want grandma reading this, or grandfather, of course? There are legal consequences for anything that's posted online. So, laws of defamation, they apply equally to social media as they do to any other form of media, whether it's a radio interview, a TV interview, or a newspaper article. Defamation applies across all those things. And there's plenty of good examples that you can find every week about issues like that hitting the courts. You may have even heard that as recently as last week, the courts ruled that media companies were responsible for comments on Facebook stories. So any media organisation that posts their stories via Facebook, they are legally responsible for the comments that the public apply below. So that's sort of something that's going to have huge impact on the media industry going forward. Another thing to remember is that companies like Facebook and Google, and then basically any media company, they attach content to your profile which can be warehoused and retrieved for life. So that may not mean a great deal to you now, but sort of a throwaway comment that you make today, 5 years down the track, if you're going for a job interview, oftentimes recruiters, look to LinkedIn and other social media platforms when they're doing their due diligence. A throwaway comment made today could somehow make its way into a job application 5 years, 10 years down the track. So just an ill thought out tweet or an ill thought out post now can come back to bite you pretty much at any time. Are any questions about that part of it so far? That all makes sense? Yeah, Maria?
I did notice last week that some media outlets, and I can't remember which one it was, but it said that comments had been turned off. And that might have been, and it wasn't just a particular topic, because sometimes a topic is too controversial and they just don't want to open up the floodgates. But just any kind of comment was switched off, and that must have been in reaction to that. Is that legislation now? Is that new legislation?
Yes, that is. So, I can't remember off the top of my head which court that appeared in. I've got a funny feeling it was New South Wales. I think that issue isn't dead and buried yet. I think it may yet go to a higher court at some stage. I think the media companies were going to challenge that. And, the tech side of the things goes a little bit above my head at this stage. But the bottom line is that, if someone, particularly with Facebook's a great example, if someone responds with a defamatory comment just in the comments to an article, then that media company is liable for it. So, and I suppose the takeaway from that is, if as an athlete or a performer, if you post something on a website or a Facebook page or your Twitter feed, the comments that are made on that may end up reflecting on you in some way. So, and often a lot of those things, if they're defamatory or vilifying or in that type of ballpark, you don't really want to be wasting your time in court. So you just, every time you say something, tweet something, blog about something, just have that in the back of your mind that what could possibly go wrong with that.
Can I jump in there, Damien?
Yeah, go.
So even just recently with us, Paralympics Australia brought in their media team just to sort of give us a bit of a demo around that as well. And he sent off one of their younger staff to go through our whole table tennis team social medias, and they picked up as well what pages we follow, which is another big one as well. So it was more the boys that copped a bit of slack through this because of certain pages they followed. But even for me, I was like, all of a sudden, like, oh, hang on, like, what do I actually follow? Even though it was like cake making and this, like things like this. But it's little things like that, which you may not think at the time are much of a deal, that later on, if someone really wants to spend the time to look into things, they can come across some things you may not want.
Doesn't take much, does it?
No, not at all.
Alrighty. So onto the tips. Now, all of these I put together if you imagine a interviewee type thing, like a typical media interview. Here's a couple of tips that I sort of put together, and if you remember 2 or 3 of them, that's fantastic. If you remember all of them, even better. But if you take away a couple of these, I think you'll be in good stead in the future. The golden rule in my mind is, if you have the opportunity to be interviewed by a journalist, is my golden rule is take a deep breath. You know, unless you've just walked off stage or walked off the court or walked off the playing field, generally you've got an opportunity to think about the media request and how it is you want to approach it. So the best thing you can possibly do is, you know, take a big deep breath and compose yourself and use that opportunity to prepare for the conversation or the interview ahead. And it really is like preparation. I can't stress that more importantly. It's all about use every minute, every second available to you to prepare for that interview. And that's the time, you know, if it's 5 minutes, if it's a day to think about the interview, then it's well worthwhile doing it. And thinking about what 2 or 3 key messages that you want the audience to remember. Most of the time, these interviews last no longer than 2 or 3 minutes. And at the time, it feels like a lifetime, these conversations with journalists, but 2 or 3 minutes isn't a very long time. And that's your opportunity to deliver a message that you want the audience to remember. And be authentic. So when I found out I was going to be doing this presentation today, I thought I'd ask around a few athletes that I've dealt with over the years and get a couple of reflections on, you know, what sort of strategies they use. And one of the ones I spoke to was Nat Medhurst, who's effectively a professional netball player. And she said, across the board, I think athletes should learn to answer a question with an opinion that hasn't been spoon-fed by their media departments. So, and I think by that, what she means is, you know, feel free to be yourselves. You know, don't try and be anything you're not. Don't try and come across, you know, uber professional or, you know, don't try too hard to be too clever, or, you know, even bearing in mind some of the, you know, cautionary tales that we've already spoken about today, that it's really important to be yourselves, because, you know, people like reading about people, journalists like finding out those little backstories that we talked about earlier on. And, you know, if you try and sort of be too professional, too, you know, straight-faced, it's, you know, it's not going to be a very interesting experience for anyone. So just be yourselves, and it's going to be a really interesting and fun experience. Probably one of the most important ones is to do what I call stay in your lane, which, you know, it's a bit of a sporting term, but all that means is keep the content of the interview specific to what your experience is. You know, if you're getting asked questions about an opponent, or if you're getting asked questions about something that's happening outside your field of expertise, that's when you can start getting into trouble. When you're speculating about what other people are thinking or what other people are saying, that's when you get into trouble. So if you focus on what you saw, focus on what you did, and focus on your field of expertise, then you won't go too far wrong at all. I won't go too much into it today, but if you want to know more about it, I'm always available to chat. But different forms of media have different requirements. So, you know, for radio or TV, they're only after a very short, what we call a grab or a sound bite, which oftentimes can be as little as 10 seconds. So in an interview, you could be chatting away for 5 or 10 minutes, but when that edited interview finally airs, it could be as few as, or the actual, you know, your comments part of the interview, that could be as little as, you know, 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So you've got to be on your guard, you've got to be on your game with radio and TV, whereas for online, and print forms of media, you've got a lot more scope to chat and to, have a more, a lengthier message heard. So it pays to be aware of, who it is that's interviewing you and where that interview is going to land, so that you can get your message across in as few words as you can.
Damien, can I ask a question? And Milly may have some experience on how she's handled a situation like this. How can you make sure the interview stays in your lane? So this morning I was driving to work and Dane Zorko of the Brisbane Lions was being interviewed, and obviously that straight away turned to not the Lions win on the weekend, but what do you think about Essendon, and have they thrown the AFL under the bus essentially? Like, how do you bring it back to the message that you want to get across?
Am I going, or are you going to go, Damien?
Oh no, you go, Milly. You might have some. Do you have a go-to technique for trying to keep the topic what it is you want to talk about?
Yeah, I guess thankfully for me so far, I haven't had anything too controversial get thrown my way. Sometimes there was a particular one though that sort of did pop up around Glasgow Games. And one of our teammates made a comment about the Singaporean team. So there was a small chance, because we ended up meddling there. So then the media then wanted to speak to us about that. And there was one point they did bring the Singaporean team and our teammate into it. But yeah, at that sort of point, we were able then just to say, it was a big team effort and we're stoked to have won a medal and so forth like that. So it was I guess not an easy one to deflect from, but yeah, other than that though, generally the media have been pretty kind to me, so I don't have too many war stories, thankfully.
That's not a bad way to go about it. I can go into this a little bit now, but in terms of, Milly talked about deflecting or just turning the content of the conversation back to what it is, to staying in your lane and talking about what is your, sticking to your experience. Probably there's a million techniques for just trying to steer the conversation back, but one of the best ones I've found is, for example, if a journalist asks a question that's outside your area or, even sort of, falls into a controversial category or sort of above what your field is. I think the easiest way just to sort of deal with that is to say, oh, look, that's something that's above my pay grade. I can't tell you too much about that, but what I can tell you about is bang, and that's just a polite way, you could quite easily say, oh, no comment, or I've got no comment to make about that. And that's, you're quite within your rights to do that, but it's just a bit of a gruff way to handle a question. And ultimately, the journalists aren't, it's very rare for journalists to be out to grill athletes and performers and researchers, particularly in the university space. All a journalist is out to do is to get your take on what's happened and, to make that news relatable to the average Joe. So it's pretty rare that they're going to be trying to trip you up. That's the sort of thing they'll do with politicians and, people at that level. Whereas, the type of interviews that you may be doing, they just want to get your take on things. So, if you do cop a hairy one, it's just a matter of saying, that's, smile politely, say, that's above my pay grade, but, what I can talk to you about today is X, Y, Z. And most of the time that'll steer you out of trouble. But there are other little techniques, and I'm quite happy to share those with you if ever you find yourself in that position. It's another good tip. I wasn't going to go a great deal into, you know, things about presentation and that sort of thing. You know, if you do want to know about that, I can give you a couple of little basic tips about what to do with your hands and what to do with your posture. If you want to go down that track, we've spoken about difficult questions or curly questions. When I was talking about preparation before, that's your opportunity. If you do have, you know, sometimes, you know, if you've just walked off the field or you've walked off the court or you've just finished performing, you don't always have that opportunity to prepare, but most of the time you will. And when you've got that opportunity to prepare, that's the time to read the room and have a think about what questions might come your way. So you yourselves will know the industry you work in and the activity that you work in. You know what's going to be newsy and perhaps interesting to most people, and you'll have an opportunity to think, okay, what tricky questions might come my way? And if you have a chance to think about that, maybe jot down some notes or even bounce them off your teammates or colleagues beforehand, that's your opportunity just to think about, you know, what challenging curly questions might come my way and how might I deal with them, because you don't want to be thinking about that on the spot. If you've got the chance, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes beforehand, just have a little think about what questions are going to make me uncomfortable. And, you know, that time spent thinking about that is time well spent. You're really going to perform a lot better if you've got an answer in the back of your mind. So when the question comes, and it probably will come, it's there ready for you to go. You don't have to and and think about it on the spot. And in that regard, like another tip from Nat Medhurst was, in those situations when the curly questions come, you know, be honest. And you can give a frank opinion on the team and your role within the team. So, you know, you don't throw, like they say, you don't throw your teammates under a bus, or you don't throw your colleagues under a bus. You can talk about your role within that team and whether or not you've succeeded or failed in executing your role. And most of the times that's all a journalist wants to know. So if you've just come away having lost a game or had a particularly bad game, or, you know, not a great performance, if you acknowledge that and talk about that, you know, in regards to your role within the team or within the group, then that's all you really need to do in that situation. And the other thing to think about too is watch and listen what other people do in those situations. You know, when you consume media, when you read the newspapers and listen to the news, you know, think about the people who do that well and look comfortable in doing it, and maybe just make a mental note of some of those tips. I'm going to finish off with a really quick mock interview with Milly. But before I do that, I wanted to share with you an interview or a news story that I found probably demonstrates this. So I'll try and share my screen if I can.
That's working.
Go back to Zoom. Yeah, click it. So yeah, open your. Oh, you are sharing. Did you do audio? So can you guys see Damien's screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, can you see this?
Yep, Broncos.
Yes. All right. Let's hope this works.
Soul searching on Sunday morning, the Broncos, mired in yet another crisis, needed a leader. So, who stepped up? The man Brisbane's board ruled is not captaincy material. Lodge ripping into his own team, claiming arrogance seeped in.
I think maybe you know, across the board, some people aren't as good as what they think, and we've got plenty of work to do to be a better team. That's also me as well, that's in that category.
The prop, so willing to be accountable, he rejected a staff member's attempt to end the interview.
We're not hiding from anything, we're happy to do the media.
Seabolds reacted, making 9 changes to the team, thrashed 59-0. Promoted are Oates, who moves to second row, joined on the edge by Offahengawe. Lodge starts at prop. Xavier Coates starts on the wing, while Staggs returns at centre. Out of the 13 are Hopewate, Flegler, Bullymore and Arthurs.
We haven't ticked any boxes, we haven't achieved anything, we haven't won the comps they did in the 90s.
One of
All right, so hopefully that worked okay. I think the point I was trying to illustrate there is, you know, the backdrop to that was that the Broncos have been going quite poorly in terms of their results, and the players up until that point had not done any interviews for whatever reason. And what that player did in that instance was to be as accountable as he possibly can. And that actually won over a lot of respect, a lot of positive media in terms of being accountable and fronting up mostly for what his role within the team was. So he was more than happy to say that, you know, that he himself and also the team hadn't been going particularly well. And what that did was that basically stops a journalist in their tracks sometimes. You know, if it starts to turn a little bit negative, that conversation, if you say, well, yeah, I absolutely, I didn't perform as well as I would have liked. You know, that's oftentimes that gets the interview back on your terms. So, but it takes a lot of, you know, experience and practice at doing that. But that's just sort of one thing to think about, that, you know, sometimes the best approach is to just be upfront about it. And then it's all out in the open, and, you know, the media can't go anywhere else with it. I'm really conscious that we're light on for time. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to jump on them now, but I've also got a little mock interview I was going to try with Milly as well. But are there any questions at this point? Cool. I'll make sure that, you know, I'm always available for assistance. It's my role to advise on media things. So I'm always happy to take phone calls, emails, whatever you like. But Milly, if you're ready to have a little play, we'll I'll put you on the spot.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, Milly. So you know, can you just give me a little bit of can you give the readers or the listeners a bit of a rundown about how you've been training in isolation?
Isolation proved pretty good for me, thankfully. Thanks to the VIS, I was able to set up a decent sort of gym inside our shed, and we moved a table into the back room of the house. So I've been able to maintain a certain level. But as of today, though, we're back in the hall. So I'm pretty excited to sort of start building back up my fitness.
Right. What sort of gym work does a table tennis player do?
Well, I guess the best way for me to describe a table tennis player is we need the speed of a 100-meter sprinter, we need the poise of a golfer, and the mentality of a chess player. So with all these things combined, we need to work on quite a bit. But in the gym, I guess I work a lot on speed and power. My legs and my glutes are probably the strongest muscles inside my body, and then I maintain a lot of stability and strength through my shoulder as well.
And you're back in I suppose a team environment this week. How do you expect that's going to go?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting to get back into the team environment. Through isolation, everyone was really connected, particularly through Zoom. Beforehand, it hadn't been such a strong bond. So funnily enough, it's been a fantastic thing for our squad. So I'm looking forward to bringing what was built up through isolation back into the hall.
and must have been a bit of a downer for you, I guess, when Tokyo was postponed. How are things going in terms of qualification for next year?
Yeah, I guess in terms of Tokyo, it was a strange feeling. As of this point right now, we would be preparing for the Australian Open and then getting ready to head over to Tokyo for a training camp. But with that in mind, we've reset our goals. So we've got another year ahead of us now. And I think that's a perfect opportunity now to get to be a whole nother 365 days better than what I would have been competing this year. So yeah, I mean, it was a strange feeling at the beginning, but there's only good things to come out of it.
Cool. And what are your goals in terms of qualification and, I suppose, you know, performance should you be selected?
Yeah, so qualifications, we're still unsure of when the final round will be done. Earlier this year in January, we had the first qualification. I missed out by 4 points on count back there, but there's still one more position up for grabs. So that was to be played in April. But yeah, obviously with the current situation though, I'm still waiting on Table Tennis Australia and the International Table Tennis Federation to sort of lay out what the final criteria will be for the last position.
There hasn't been a lot of international sport, you know, in recent times, and we've seen some issues with the US Open tennis in terms of, you know, whether certain players will compete and, you know, whether or not they will compete. What are your views on that? Do you feel comfortable about playing overseas if the opportunity came up?
Yeah, that's sort of another area that I haven't really focused too much on at the moment. I'm really just working towards getting back in the hall, working on my fitness, and then seeing when Table Tennis Australia are going to open back up our competitions.
I think World Championships are in, is it South Korea coming up? If they proceeded, would you feel safe?
At the moment, they're set and scheduled to compete in September, but at the moment, I'm pretty sure we're following guidelines of the Australian government. So I'll wait to hear a bit more from Table Tennis Australia.
Cool. Thanks, Milly.
No problem.
I think Milly nailed it. She's way too smart for me. I can't catch her out.
You were trying there, though. I don't like that.
But I mean, you did perfectly. I mean, they weren't, you know, particularly curly questions, but they were questions that I'm sure you recognised. If you handle them poorly, they could come back to bite you. So yeah, you did really well there. Like, all you did was you answered about what was in your control. You know, you can't speak authoritatively about whether or not it's safe to compete in Korea or New York or anywhere else for that matter. All you can do is comment about, well, this is what I understand the situation is, and I can only control how I train and how I perform. So that's where my focus is, and that's exactly what you said. So 10 out of 10.
Yay.
You've done this before, I can tell. And the other thing that I really liked about your responses were, I wish I'd have written them down when you talked about, you know, you've got to have the speed of a sprinter. What were the three things you said?
The poise of a golfer and the mentality of a chess player.
Love it. I really love that. So, you know, if I was a journalist, I would be jumping on those things, because sometimes, you know, when I spoke about soundbite, that's just a really beautiful soundbite. Like, if you've got, you know, I don't know if you've said that before in an interview, or you've read that somewhere, or you've spoken about that before, you know, something like that, that's 5 or 10 seconds of gold. You know, if you've got an opportunity to roll that out in an interview or use that through social media, some of that's priceless, you know, a little line like that. So yeah, that was awesome. Really enjoyed that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. That's pretty much, like, I think I've touched on everything I wanted to touch on today, and probably gone a little bit overtime, but I'm more than happy to take questions, and if we run out of time, I'm more than happy to, you know, respond via email or phone or whatever you like.
That was fantastic, guys. It was really good to watch. And I love how Damien just kept going and Milly would, you know, kept very calm and would answer the same question in a different way. It was really good to watch. Guys, while we have Damien and Milly here, if there's any questions, also just questions in general for Milly about her career. Milly, I don't know if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to share. You know, maybe you've been playing elite sport at quite a high level for quite a few years now. What's changed for you in the media from when you first started in your career to now? Does it get easier each interview you do, or are you still nervous beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started playing table tennis, I never imagined that I would ever go on TV to speak or go on a radio and talk. So I think the biggest thing though that I feel now is I'm incredibly grateful for the fact that I get to play sport, and it's such an awesome opportunity. And then the fact that then people want to ask me questions and want to do maybe a piece on me or something, I think like that's awesome, because I think to myself, like, I'm just Melissa Tapper, like why is anyone going to be interested in that? So every time now I get the opportunity to maybe do a media piece or an article, I just give it a go because it's a fantastic opportunity. I have found it has gotten easier over time. Sometimes I find in the end I can talk too much, so it's a bit of a fine line as well, not talking too much. But yeah, I think it's just, yeah, like Damien said, if you be yourself and have a bit of fun with it as well, I don't know that you can really go too wrong with it.
Thank you. Guys, don't be shy. Does anyone want to jump in and ask Milly a question? It doesn't have to be media related.
Milly, are you trialling for Olympics and Paralympics for Tokyo, or?
Yeah, yep. So I qualified my spot for the Paralympics. Oh, hang on, what year are we? 2020. I actually qualified at the beginning of 2019 for Tokyo for the Paralympics. Yeah, but then so the first stage of Olympic qualies were at the end of January this year, and I ended up missing out by 4 points on countback. So I finished third. The top two automatically went through. Mm-hmm. And there's one more position left, so I'll try qualify for that one. And if that's the case, that means I'll get to do a double again. If not, though, I still get to hopefully get over to Tokyo and compete at the Paralympics.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, if no one has any questions, please thank Damien and Milly for giving up their time to join us today. Thank you also to all of you for jumping on the line today. I know everyone's been doing a lot of catch-up exams and practical classes. And Milly, would you like to touch on what we are lucky enough to have you on the line? I know I was about to wrap up, but I just had a good question. So Milly's actually an ACU graduate as well. What are a few key tips, you know, now that I imagine at some points you thought, it was going to be a long road to finishing that degree. Are you glad you've got that degree now, and how did you manage your time while studying?
Yeah, so when I was at ACU, I was at the Melbourne campus. I did a Bachelor of Exercise Science, and it was a 3-year course. I went straight in out of high school, and for me, the funny thing was it was my table tennis that ended up being my outlet. So I would be at uni all day, get my work done, and then I knew I got to go train of an evening. And I know I was quite good at balancing around that. But ACU also, I'm assuming they still got the elite athlete program. Yeah. So I was a part of that as well. So certain times of the year, I would be away for a competition. So I was able to work with the team to be able to manage those sort of periods as well. I think it was really important. As athletes, I think we're quite good at time management and being disciplined at doing things with a goal in mind. So for myself, when it came to getting work done, I would allocate my time to get that done, so then I knew I could go and then train or compete, whatever it may have been. So for me, sport was my outlet, but I also knew that I really wanted to have an education under my belt. And when you get to combine those two and have people that, I guess, help support you do that so you're not completely stressed out, is a massive benefit. Yeah.
That's great. Look, thank you all. I'll let you go because it is past 1 o'clock and I told you it would go for 45 minutes, but really appreciate everyone's time today, and stay safe and enjoy getting back into those team training environments and getting out of the house. See you later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.